Hey now, welcome to another edition of the Inside BS Show. And today we're talking strategy, one of my favorite topics. No surprise, because I picked the guests, that we have topics that I like to talk about. I hope you like strategy as much as I do. I've got somebody who's the absolute perfect person because his entire career is kind of like a model for what you would want as a strategist. My guest today is Barry Horwitz, and he's a strategy consultant. He owns his own company, but he has the classic consulting background. Harvard MBA, one of the top consulting companies in the nation, and then he went on to form his own company. So we're going to talk to him about the nuances involved in strategy. We're also going to talk to him about how you develop business as a strategist. You can't just go knock on doors and say, hey, you got some problems I can solve. So I want to talk to him about business development. And I also want to talk to him particularly about some of the challenges that businesses are facing as a result of the last couple of years. So if you want to look inside the C-suite, we've got the perfect guy to take us in there today. Please join me in welcoming Barry Horwitz to the Inside BS Show. Barry, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dave. Happy to be here.
All right, so you do have, when I was a little baby consultant, if I were to pick my background, I would pick a background identical to yours. Unfortunately, I didn't have the same set of skills that you have. So my background was a little different, but you've got a classic consulting background. So when you're at one of the best consulting companies on the planet, right? When you're at Boston Consulting Group, right? When you were there, did you always have an entrepreneurial streak? Were you always thinking to yourself, listen, at some point I'm going to stop working with these knuckleheads and do this on my own? Was that your intention? Were you always an entrepreneur, or did you develop that as time went on?
Well, actually, though I wouldn't call them knuckleheads, I didn't expect that I would stay with the firm forever. I did think perhaps longer than I did, but I did leave for an entrepreneurial opportunity. Before I went there, before I got my MBA, I actually was an intrapreneur. I built an in-store bakery division in a local supermarket chain. I was given the opportunity right out of college to take a look at a pilot that they had and try to figure out if it was working. And they put me in charge of building the division. I got a chance to build 32 bakeries, and I thought that was a great experience. So it was clear I'd want to build something again.
Yeah, that's I can't think of anything more fun than building a bakery. I mean, just the smells alone every day. I mean, eventually I guess you get used to it, but the smells alone would be enough to get you through the morning for sure.
I did eat an awful lot of donuts in my time there. I'm not sure why I'm not 400 pounds, but it was a great experience.
All right, so there's an expression that absolutely infuriates me, and from spending a little time on your website, it looks like you are more diplomatic, but I can tell it tends to rub you the wrong way too, and that's the expression that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And whenever I heard that expression, Barry, I thought to myself, oh, that's great. So we're going to build a good culture and everybody's just going to sit around and be happy, but we're not going to know what direction we're going in, right? Why does that bother you? And I'm reading into what you wrote on your website. Why does that bother you so much? Because it absolutely frustrates the hell out of me.
Well, I think that there are a lot of times that strategy comes in and out of favor. Because people assume, the world is changing quickly, and so you can't predict, so we don't know. And I think while culture is critically important, and in fact, having the right culture for your strategy is going to be pretty important, you still need to decide where you're going. You still need to understand who you're up against and what the market needs. And, so I think it's still relevant. I don't think there's been a time in the world where people thought the market was moving slowly, right?
I never understood there's the Covey expression, like you get the right people on the bus, but then if the bus driver has no GPS, right? I used to say roadmap, now I say GPS. If the bus driver has no GPS, then you got the right people on the bus, but it's going to the wrong destination. And strategy is the GPS, right?
That's right. Otherwise, you end up with the Yogi Berra kind of quote, which says, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there.
That's it. That's it. And when you come to a fork in the road, take it. So, all right, let's talk about the definition of strategy. I was going to say your definition, but there's one definition of strategy. How do you define strategy? And you're sitting with a CEO, and he describes a problem to you, and you say to him, "That's a strategic problem. We can help you there." Give us a definition.
Well, a lot of times it's really about figuring out where you want to go. One way I've heard it said is, and that I like a lot, is where are we going to play and how are we going to win? And by that, the reason I like that is because part of what you have to decide is what you're not going to do, right? I mean, one of the things that happens is gradually over time, people add these new initiatives and they end up with a number of different initiatives, and then each one of them gets a little bit diluted. And then they're not as focused, and they can't be as effective. So a lot of times that's the issue, is deciding what to stop doing or what to really tightly focus on.
Yeah, and talk a little bit about, Barry, the difference between strategy and then ultimately having the right pieces in place to implement a strategy, right? Do you sit back and advise CEOs like, listen, we could create this whole strategy for you, but there's no way you could execute on this now, so you need to scale it back? I mean, there's often a disconnect between what the strategy is and the ability of the firm to execute.
I'd say that's exactly right. One of the very first projects I did as an independent, and this was quite a long time ago, was an organization with some really interesting technology for food production. It's now a lot more well known. It's called sous vide. It's a frozen prepared approach. They had launched off in 7 or 8 different directions, every kind of market that this might apply to. And what that meant is we weren't being very effective in any. So we had to spend some time getting them to think about which are the ones where the market's ready now, which are the ones that might be ready later, and which are the ones where the value proposition is the strongest. And let's take 1 or 2 of them and go there and take them out of the other markets, not necessarily forever, but for now, to really be able to build the solid core of the business and then build on it from there. I found that with a number of clients, actually.
And when you're assessing the overall market conditions and you look at the capabilities of the firm that's hired you, oftentimes a good consultant, because they have fresh eyes, can spot the pitfalls and the real opportunity right away. Do you find that you need to do in-depth research as much to support your hypothesis and convince the company to adopt it as much as you have to do to actually confirm what you've seen? So basically, your experience becomes what people pay for, but then you have to do research to support it because you won't get buy-in otherwise. That's what I'm trying to say. Is that a condition that you've seen play out in your work with clients?
Yes, I've seen it many times, and I think a big part of what I'm seeing is if I'm just telling them what I think, even if I have some experience, I probably don't have experience exactly in their field, for one. And so they view it as perhaps my opinion. And if it's my opinion against their opinion, I'm pretty sure they'll prefer their opinion. It's been cultivated for a while. So it really does need the rigor and the analysis. Even the work that I did when I had the experience was based on during the analysis, figuring out the opportunity. The other thing I'd say too is that I haven't been just a consultant in my career. I have been on the other side of the desk. I have been, with P&L experience. I have had people working for me, so I understand what implementation's about as well. So I think very much those are elements that I bring to it.
What happens, Barry, when you're tasked with an engagement. They bring you in, like they know your background, they know you're perfect for the engagement. You're tasked with the engagement, but the business has no capability to live up to the plan that you're going to put together. Do you tell them up front? Do you do initial discovery process and then try and present to them, hey, listen, this is what it's going to take. You tell me if you want to proceed, or do you just do the engagement, turn it over to them, and kind of clean hands, walk away? What's your approach in that regard?
Well, it's a little more between those kind of approaches. One of the things that I like to do is really make sure that my work is interactive. So I don't go off and then do my magic and bring them, ta-da, here's your strategy. I work with them. I work with their people as they start to understand and see it. We're able to talk about what it needs, where that fits with them. And if we think that they need to really build capabilities, first of all, they have to be convinced that it's a place they ought to go, so that it's an investment worth making. And if it's going to take a while to build it, then we think that out a couple of years. And there have been others where, there's been a real gap between what they want and where they are, in which case we call for a first phase. We work on something to get them ready and allow them to build that for a while and ask them to come back if they've done that and they're still interested, and then we'll build onto it from there. So I do try to leave them with something that I know they can do something with it. There's not much point in giving them a perfect strategy that they can't execute.
Right. Have you had occasion to deliver the dead-on, honest truth, and that gets you fired?
I've had to deliver dead-on, honest truth. I can't say that I've been fired very often. I think I only really have one client who clearly didn't like where I was going, and the project ended a bit early. Other times, if they're, again, I have to be diplomatic, so I don't want to be insulting. It's not that they're not intelligent. It's that, when we really look at the facts, if I can convince them that there's a challenge here, a lot of times they'll say, well, can you help me get there? So more often than not, I've had it well received, even though I am fairly often it's not happy news that I'm bringing.
Yeah. No, I've had that experience a couple of times where we did an engagement. This is back when I worked for Gallup for a number of years, and this is back when I was at Gallup. We did some extensive research, and the research was completely divergent from the leader's view of the world. And the person in one particular case, the person said, well, this information can't get out or I'll get fired. So you're going to get fired first. And I looked at him and I'm like, well, that seems fair.
Yeah, sure. Well, there is often a lot of times where they really like it to be the consultant that has the bad news. And then they can use you as that lever. There have been times. One of the toughest ones, and I did this with a group, so it wasn't my relationship. I was subcontracting to a group. We were dealing with a glass bottle manufacturer, and they had engaged us for growth in the U.S. market. And what we ended up finding is that while they were really focused on an exciting new technological area being potentially displaced by plastic, they ignored a whole lot of other markets that were already now starting to be eroded. And ultimately what we delivered to them is a plant consolidation strategy because they had already begun to lose, and the momentum was picking up on losing major segments of their market. So it went from being an innovation and growth to a plant consolidation model. But they started to understand that as we followed along, and they could see the hints. And so rather than fire us, they really needed us to help them with, well, what do we do? So,
yeah, and that was a great example of where the client was like, oh man, there's a train coming, and Barry and his team can help us get off the tracks. All right, so Barry, I'm going to ask you this question. I want you to take a minute and think about it. I want you to talk to folks who are out there now in professional services, whether it be consulting or in the practice of law, CPA firms. I want you to talk to them about navigating the internal politics of a client organization, right? Because it's their politics, but sometimes we end up playing a role in it. Sometimes we're pawns. Sometimes they try and use us. And I want to tap into your experience and how you handle some of those situations. And I want to do that in just 1 minute. I need to remind folks right now that our show is brought to you by Sandrowski Corporate Advisors. And for over 35 years, Sandrowski has provided expert client service all over the United States in the area of accounting, but they're not your typical accounting firm. Sandrowski can help you with tax planning. They can help you with any type of financial consulting, but they excel in working with privately held businesses and working with families of wealth, affluent families. Now, why these two areas? Well, they seem to go hand in hand, because what will happen when you sell your business, you will become, hopefully, a family of wealth. And then that opens up a whole new world of opportunity, but it also opens up a whole new range of, let's say, challenges for you, because immediately people will begin pitching you on their great business idea. Well, this is where Sandrowski can really help you, because Sandrowski has written the book on what's called family offices. They can help you form a family office, which is essentially a company that can vet investments for you, that can help you manage your wealth, that can take all of the stress of those tough conversations off of your plate. The family office can be a clearinghouse for your financial advisors. It can help you hire and connect with good legal advice. It can help you bring in consultants to do specific things. And Sandrowski can be the backbone that sets all this up for you. If you want help with something like this, give them a call at 866-717-1607, 866-717-1607. Sandrowski Corporate Advisors, they're a CPA firm with a different perspective. We're also brought to you by My Revenue Roadmap Guide. If you want a business development plan for your professional service firm, I've got one for you, and I want to give it to you for free. It's my way of saying thank you for joining us today on the show. Go to this website, revenueroadmapguide.com, revenueroadmapguide.com. Type that all in together. Enter your contact info. You can download my business development plan for professional services firms. You can customize it for your firm. It'll work fantastically for you. I use this with my clients every day. I customize it for them. You can do the same. RevenueRoadmapGuide.com. Enter your contact info. Download it for free today. We're talking with Barry Horwitz. He's a strategy consultant. Horwitz & Company is the name of his firm. You can reach out to him at 617-928-0572, 617-928-0572. Okay, Barry, so the part of this job that I hate the most is the internal politics at my client's office, right? I love going to hang out with the client. I love tinkering around under the hood. I love helping them become more successful. I like solving big problems. But I don't ever want to get in between two people whose ambition is, the size of Texas. So give us some thoughts on how to handle the politics at the client site. And quite frankly, just if we can, stay out of it.
Well, and one of the things I was reflecting on that, it's been helpful that I have worked in large organizations as well as senior management. So I've lived and experienced those politics from the inside. I start a lot of my projects. In fact, I start all of my projects by making sure I talk to each of the critical people one-on-one. And I try to build as many of those kind of personal, connecting, trusting relationships as I can. So when I start to see signs of that, two things that I try to focus on. One, I try to stay out of the emotions. I try to get them to calm down if it's heated, or just generally if I see it's related to an emotional issue. What's the facts? What are the data behind it? I try to be that objective, data-oriented, analysis-based approach. But I also, at times, I've been a bit of a diplomat between, say, a CEO who is unhappy with the performance of some of his people and people who don't understand why he's unhappy or what he's trying to do. If I can mentor them, guide them along the way while we're working on this project, sometimes I can help improve the relationship. So I'm really trying to work around it and with it, because if they're going to be successful in making something happen, they're going to have to work within the politics they have, or at least modify them in order to do that. So I can't just ignore it. I do think I have to dig in. So I try to do that on a one-on-one, avoid embarrassing anyone in a large group, avoid confrontations, and really listen. A lot of listening.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. Have you had occasion to come across a top producer who also happened to be either disruptive or just bad for the culture of the organization? I mean, I seem to, because I do a lot of work in business development, I seem to come across those people, with more frequency than I would like. Let's put it that way. And it's a real challenge for the organization, because this person is doing the job to a very high standard according to the organization, yet they're just aggravating people internally. And you can put programs in place to try and stop it, but in the end, you and I both know what the right answer is, and then we got to go back and convince other people. I'm curious as to if you've come across that type of situation and what you do when those things arise.
Well, I do a lot of what it sounds like you do, because yes, of course, I've encountered those, and oftentimes, if I can pinpoint, what they're doing, I'll try to talk to the performer themselves. That often I know doesn't really cause a lot of change. I'll also maybe talk to the CEO and make sure he or she understands what they're dealing with and the pros and cons. I also try to deal with, again, the individuals that have to encounter that person. Maybe they can react or interact to that person with that person in a different way, create more pushback. Sometimes that's come out in like a group brainstorming session, but more often it's shuttle diplomacy, back and forth. And occasionally I've had times where a CEO eventually removed a person, for example, that probably should have been removed 3 to 6 months earlier. And, everybody, at least acknowledge, well, at least finally that happened. So, it's a process. There's no easy answer. It just takes time.
Yeah, and sometimes those are the days when you're glad that you're a consultant and you don't have to live with that over the time. So let's talk a little now about client lifetime value, Barry. One of the things that kind of has separated me over the years, and that to the extent that I've had any success in business development and consulting, has been always keeping my eyes open, keeping my ears open, and looking for another place where we can add value and, help the client. Talk to me about what you do from that perspective to, enhance the lifetime value of the client to you, to help the client become even more successful, to lead to, after work, let's say, from a consulting perspective. How have you been able to, to kind of pull that off throughout your career?
Well, probably not as well as I wish I could, to be honest, because a lot of times strategy is one of those things where you help set them on the right course, and then they're on that course. Though I would say fairly recently, I've had a number of clients where we do the strategy and it points to a little more depth of involvement. So there's a follow-on project to really refine to a tighter business plan. There have been times where I've stepped in to play a little bit of an interim role on a role that they know they need right away. So that becomes a bit of an extension or a mentoring relationship with the CEO for a little while. The other thing that's been helpful is a fair number of my clients, though, do come back after a year or 2 to 3 sometimes to say, well, we've played out that strategy and we think it's time to take another look. The world is changing. Let's take another look. Also, most of the new clients that I get have come from referrals from existing clients. So at least in that way, I keep action going. One of the nice things about being a solo practice instead of building a big team is that I don't need that many projects to have a great year, right? And I can really only handle 2 maybe 3 at a time, and so I don't need that many going on, and I think that's also helped. And the timing of, coming back and refreshing works out really well.
Yeah, along those lines, well, as you were speaking, I thought about a question that I should have asked you earlier in the interview that I want to go back and ask you now. How has COVID and all the ancillary issues related to COVID impacted the strategy for clients? Like, let's say you had a client that you worked with in 2018 or 2019. A lot of their strategy had to kind of fall by the wayside, and they must have needed to pivot. Was that a good thing for you? Did that result in more work for you, or was it one of those things where your clients were initially thinking to themselves, well, I don't know, we certainly can't bring in people from the outside now. I mean, that would be the opposite of what I would do. But how did it play out for you in your business?
Well, it actually played out pretty well. Again, because I can't handle that many, I didn't have any real big swings. One interesting thing is that I was helping just before the pandemic, helped a health and human services organization, a nonprofit in this case, that really needed to anticipate how Medicaid and Obamacare was going to change how they were getting paid, and they really needed to restructure a lot of things, put a lot more systems in place to coordinate their analysis across multiple units. And then as it turned out, that really served them particularly well when the pandemic hit, because they were now with much better infrastructure and able to handle things that were remote and able to react to that environment. I've had others where a lot of in-person meetings just shifted to remote meetings, and they had to very quickly figure out how we're going to do things differently when we can't do it face-to-face. But most of them were able to adjust pretty well. I found, though, interestingly enough, I've done a couple of projects where I haven't met most of the people I worked with in person. For an entire 6 or 8 month long project, we did a lot of it through Zoom. But, it's not as easy to facilitate a discussion through Zoom. It's not as bad to do a one-on-one, but there's still something about being in person that just works better. So we've all been trying to work with how do we work around the limitations of technology.
Yeah, and what are you seeing these days? So folks who are listening, folks who are watching, depending on when you're listening or watching to this, we're in the spring of 2022, and it seems like we're kind of over the hump. But every time you say that with COVID-19, it has another surprise. But as of right now, I'm gonna say it seems like we're kind of over the hump. Have you seen clients now being more open to doing things in person? What's your recent experience been like?
Well, my very recent experience is I got back on a plane to fly to a client for the first time in probably over 2 years.
Yeah.
Partly because we were wrestling with a complex issue, and we just felt like we needed a whiteboard to just kind of lay it out. And so I went down. This was actually in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I spent a couple of days there. And it was great to reconnect. I mean, masks on sometimes, masks off other times. Now, their organization has people all over the world anyway, so some of them are going to be remote no matter what we do. But, it's really begun. I think we have to be cautious, but I think it's a risk that is occasionally worth taking, because those kind of facilitated discussions just can't be done over a series of hour-long or 2-hour-long Zooms. So yes, I think it's starting. The interesting thing is, this client in particular are probably going to sell off their office and rent back maybe half of the space. Mm-hmm. I think there are a lot of others that are starting to rethink what do they need to be in for. And what can they do remotely? One client of mine used to have a very, every Monday they had a 2-hour-long meeting face-to-face, and people really didn't love that. When that went away, well, you can imagine it's supposed to be just a quick, what do you need to know today? But it also became an opportunity to showcase what people were working on. So you got a lot of project reports and the like. They replaced that with a Zoom call or a conference call almost every day, but 20 minutes. Here's what's going on. Here's the things that are changing today. Here's what you need to know. They loved that. As far as I know, they're staying with that. So you learn different ways of working, and sometimes they're better.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I've seen the experience that I've had kind of runs the gamut. I traveled a little starting in April of last year. I had one trip to the West Coast. I live on the East Coast. I live in Miami. I had one trip to the West Coast in April of last year, and then nothing until November of 2021. And then gradually getting into December, people were open to having me come into the office. And then when Omicron hit, they were less open, and then everybody got Omicron, and then it became kind of wide open. And I've been traveling pretty consistently, 5 to 7 days a month in January, February, March, and April of 2022. I think there's a couple of things that may surprise us, and I'd like to get your take on this. I'm seeing a lot of people who were betting on scaling back their real estate now doing a 180 and saying, you know what? We're going to wait because so many people want to be in the office. Like they did surveys of their teams, and the survey that they took in December of 2020 or January, February 2021 looks very different than it does now. That extra year of not being in the office and, working with your laptop on your lap, sitting on your couch has taken its toll, and people are welcoming of, number one, a proper work environment free of distractions, and number two, some people, that 40 hours a week or more in the office was as much social interaction for them as it was workplace interaction. So a lot of the companies that gave up their real estate are standing behind their decision thinking, hey, we made the right move. But a lot of companies that had the decision pending either because of lease ending terms or because of market conditions or whatever have kind of put it on hold because some of their employees have shifted their mindset and they actually want to be back together. And my personal experience, Barry, has been that nobody has, with the exception of December when it was crazy and everybody every other day was getting Omicron, but with the exception of that, nobody's told me no, don't come to our office. Everybody said, really, you want to come? Sure, come tomorrow. They've been very, very open to having people come back. And I really think that we underestimate the need for human interaction. I don't know that this, we were thinking it would be like 50-50 hybrid with work from home and back in the office. I'm thinking now it may skew more toward back in the office where people take Mondays and Fridays off, but Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, they want to go somewhere. What is your experience? What does your gut tell you?
Yeah, no, it's still a mix, and it depends a lot on who it is and what they're working on. But the need for human interaction is very real, and the idea of connecting with a team, having the little side chats, the conversations before entering a conference room, over coffee, those kind of things are part of the social fabric, and we do miss them. I mean, people have reflected a lot on they don't have the commute anymore, and so maybe we won't all head in at the same time and all head out at the same time. But I do think there's going to be a need. Now, my son's become a software developer, and he doesn't feel like there's not a lot of interaction that way. He'd be happier in a quiet room in the house without the commute because it's just him and the computer a lot of the time. Actually, the group leader he's working for now is in a different city than he is anyway, so showing up at the office won't make that different. On the other hand, I don't know how connected he is to the organization as a whole, because he hasn't really, they had built a big fancy office that had a lot of perks, and he hasn't lived them. So it's a different life. But yeah, I do think there was a lot of collegiality. Of course, in my consulting days, everybody was on the road a lot anyway when I was at BCG, so you saw people mostly on Fridays. But it was great to be in and connect with people I do think we're going to do some kind of hybrid, and it's probably going to skew towards more face-to-face than remote eventually.
Yeah, my experience was the same. When I was at Gallup, we would do a Thursday evening like happy hour with everybody from the office, because most people were either just getting back off the road on a Thursday, and Friday in the office was always kind of a light day, and people really looked forward to, particularly the staff folks who were in the office all the time. Gallup had this model where you could always work from home. Gallup was always 100% focused on outcomes. And if you were, let's say you were an admin and the two people you were supporting spent 80% of their time on the road, they didn't care where you worked. As long as you were accessible, you didn't have to go to an office if you didn't want to go to an office. So Thursdays became the day when everybody would come in, because everybody was looking forward to seeing one another after work that night. And I was just talking to a colleague. I was up in New York, and one of my colleagues who I worked with at Gallup, and we were saying how that he thinks they're going to go back to that, because that was a great model. And he thinks that would give people an incentive to come into the office at least one day a week. You could check and make sure people were still alive, and that there wasn't just that their paycheck wasn't just going to an account. You never heard from them, And you could also do like a legitimate check-in and sit across from somebody and say to them, listen, you're working on the ABC account. Is that guy, is he okay? Is our position solid there? And that's not the kind of conversation you want to have in front of a group on a Zoom, or maybe even want to have over any electronic device at all. It's kind of a pull aside, cup of coffee conversation where, I want to make sure we're going to be okay in this account. What do I need to do to shore it up? That's a person to person conversation, and that's I think we still need to have that.
I think we do too. The other thing, it strikes me when I joined BCG, we joined as groups because they tend to hire out of graduating classes. So, but then you end up on project teams, and I can imagine that if it was if it was during COVID, that I would really know my project team, but I wouldn't be able to stay in touch with everybody else who's not working on the same client project with me. So that is the thing that happens, and we share sort of, non-confidential issues around how do you wrestle with a client who's resisting your calls or something like that. And that kind of conversation only happens if you're talking to somebody you wouldn't normally be in a Zoom call with.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And so much of what I learned from people I ran into in the office and said, hey, I heard you were doing this with your client. Can you just give me the 5 minutes on how it works? Oh, I'll do better than that. I'll show you the slide deck. Come into my office. You don't get that on Zoom. And I don't walk down the hall and look at the dog and go, hey, can you share your slide deck with me? He's got nothing to offer in that regard. All right, Barry, tell us now, before I get you to give us 3 things to focus on, tell us now about business development. So, you're a sole practitioner, as am I. I do use contractors to do some of the, I probably do more execution than you do being in a business development role, and I use contractors for that. But as a sole practitioner who, could be prone to peaks and valleys in business, what do you do for business development? How do you connect with people? You already told us that you do great work and your clients tend to refer you. That's great. What else do you do from a business development perspective?
Well, a lot of it's been networking, and it came from a number of different networks. I mean, BCG is a great network. They actually do treat those of us who left the firm as alums. Had a lot fewer events in the last few years. The business school also is a great network, and I've gone to a lot of local events, the Alumni Association. I do some volunteer work. We have a program where we put alums together into consulting projects for nonprofits on a pro bono basis, and I've done a lot of those projects. I've met a lot of good people that way, and actually, though I didn't do that for business development, it did connect me to people who ultimately led to business, now that I've been doing this long enough. I'm also part of a professional networking group that's been useful. It's called Provisors, and it's been virtual now, which has allowed us to travel to lots of different cities. Again, I don't get a lot of referrals that way, but I get a few. and I don't need that many. I've also found resources that I can use for my clients that way. So, it's word of mouth and trust, because I think people, strategy is a complicated thing, and it's really critical to an organization, and a CEO really needs to trust who he's going to be working with or she's going to be working with. And so I build these relationships over time. I also support it, by the way, with a newsletter that I do monthly now. And that has kept me back in touch with a lot of people I know. I don't sell anything through the newsletter. I share good ideas, and I mostly send it to my people who know me. And so it doesn't lead directly to sales, but it has reminded people of what I do and kept me back in the loop, and that's helped.
Yeah, that's great. I want you to expand upon the thought of the leverage Provisors gives you, because as you know, I'm a member of Provisors as well, and the main reason I joined was because I saw it as a competitive advantage to be able to have other resources, particularly resources in other cities, when my clients called me, that I could connect them with. I do a lot of work with lawyers, and lawyers are always looking for lawyers in other jurisdictions. And as a member of Provisors, I have a lawyer. You name it, I have a lawyer there. In the United States, I can find you a lawyer, and also from a specialty standpoint, anything from Native American water rights on reservations to maritime law to buying an aircraft in a trust. I can find you that person in a network like Provisors. So for me, Provisors was a way for me to provide a competitive advantage to my clients. You just call me. I'm the guy you call when you don't know who to call, because I've got a network. I can connect you with somebody in the realm of professional services who can do just about everything. I think that is one of the most underrated aspects of this particular organization. And based on what you said, I'm thinking you probably feel the same way. Have you used it in a similar fashion?
I've used it that way in several different occasions. I was working with a client in the West Coast, Northern California, and they were looking for a part-time CFO. And so I went, I'm here in the Boston area, but there's Provisors you can connect. I got them a couple of people to talk to there. I'm just wrapping up a project now where I actually partnered with another Provisors person, where I focus largely on strategy and she focuses largely on board development. And the client concluded that they needed to do the strategy work and then, do some work on their board afterwards. And so we partnered. I've been the lead on the strategy part. And when we get to the board part coming up soon, she'll be the lead. So that's also been helpful. Yes, there have been a couple of lawyers I've referred to people, again, highly specialized, and regional as well. I needed somebody who knew something about real estate law in New York City. Well, so you connect to the New York part of Provisors, and again, you can get a couple of good people there. There are a lot of good people in there, and it's been very helpful that way.
Yeah, it's been a terrific resource, and in other groups you don't find people. At least I haven't found people of the caliber that we find in Provisors. It really allows me as a solo to compete with firms that have greater resources, because they can call me for things that they would normally, call an advertising agency for, and I can connect them with people pretty much anywhere. All right, Barry, take a minute. Think about 3 things we should take away from our time together. 3 things you want people to remember from this conversation. While you're doing that, I'm going to remind folks that we're brought to you by Sandrowski Corporate Advisors. For over 35 years, they've helped people with their accounting and tax planning. The tax planning part of this is something that I really think you should give some thought to, because if you're thinking about succession in your business and your succession plan is, well, I'm just going to sell and get out, you got to think about the tax implications of that. Because when you sell your business, you're going to pay capital gains on that wheelbarrow full of cash that you're going to bring into your front door. If you want to reduce the amount of capital gains exposure you have, you need to call Sandrowski, because they're experts in something called the Qualified Small Business Stock Exemption. Now, This is a little nuance in the tax code. I call it a nuance because the big four, they're not going to work on this. It's too small for them because it only applies to businesses that do 50 million in annual revenue or less. But if you have a business and you're going to sell it, like Harry told me a story about a business that, Harry Sandrowski told me a story about a business that he works with. The gentleman sold the business for $40 million, and because his business was prepared by Sandrowski for this event 5 years in advance, the gentleman paid $10 million less in capital gains taxes than he would have. He saved $10 million because of the way Sandrowski prepared his business for sale. If you like money and you want to take home more of it, you got to give Sandrowski a call. You can reach out to them at 866-717-1607. That's 866-717-1607. Sandrowski Corporate Advisors, they're a CPA firm with a different perspective. Don't forget, I've got a gift for you, my Revenue Roadmap Guide. Download it now. Go to that website, revenueroadmapguide.com. Enter your contact info. Get your free business development plan. You can use it. You can customize it for your professional firm. Just like I do with my clients, you can do this on your own. It's my gift to you for watching and listening to the show. My guest today is Barry Horwitz. He's a strategy consultant. The name of his company is Horwitz & Company. You can call him at 617-928-0572. 617-928-0572. Okay, Barry, what are the three things we should take away from our time together today?
Well, thanks, Dave. I mean, I think I'd start with the first one being a topic we covered fairly early on, that it's not just about culture. Strategy is important, and strategy is really about choices and setting a direction and really thinking more broadly. So even if the world is moving quickly, I think strategy is an important thing. Second to that, I guess, is that strategy is not a thing you do once every 5 years and put in a nice book. It's more a way of thinking. So you really need to assess what's going on in the market, whether your competitors, what they're doing, with the people that pay you, what your market wants, or any technological things that might be driving change. So it's an adaptive thing. It's best working with a lot of your senior team all at once, not just the CEO alone. It's a living document. It ought to be something that you come back to. And I would say that's probably the most important thing. It's people and culture aligned with a clear direction, a clear focus on what it is you're trying to do. That's critically important.
All right. That was great. No, those are three great things to take away from our time together. Our guest is Barry Horwitz. You can reach out to him at 617-928-0572, 617-928-0572. Barry, thank you so much for joining us. It was great to have you here with us today.
Hey, thank you, Dave. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, folks, for listening. Thank you for watching. My name is Dave Lorenzo. We're here every day with a brand new interview for you. Until tomorrow, here's hoping you make a great living and live a great life.